Great, good afternoon and welcome to the Connected Virtual Tech event. Our panel this afternoon is on the next big thing in digital workplace and integrated mobile apps. And we've got a phenomenal panel. Looking forward to the conversation this afternoon. So the first thing I want to do is allow each of our panelists to give just a brief introduction of who you are and what you do. We've got Phil Kirschner, Sagar Morabia, Deng Grippi, and Erica Eaton. So Erica, why don't we kick off with you?
Great. Thanks so much, Darlene, and thanks for having me. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, depending upon where you're dialing in from. My name's Erica Eaton. I'm the CEO at Comfy. Comfy is a workplace technology platform centered around connecting with the historically disparate technologies, systems, and tools that employees and workplace managers use to create fantastic workplace experience and drive optimization across the real estate portfolio. So I'm a pleasure to be speaking with everyone today.
Great, thanks, Erica. Sagar.
Thanks, Darlene. Hi, I'm Sagar Morabia with Yardi. Yardi is a real estate property management and investment management technology software provider. We have been in the business for approximately 4 decades now. So, it's really great having that background and being able to speak about the real estate and technology today. I've been with Yardi for over 13 years now, and in my role as a director of global solutions, I focus on commercial and corporate suite of products. So I oversee several products and services teams that helps our clients globally to design and implement the right products and solution to help scale their real estate strategy.
Great. And Phil is an independent consultant now, but former colleague of mine from both JLL and WeWork. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing now.
Yes, hi everyone. So as Darlene said, I am formerly at WeWork and JLL, but I really cut my teeth as a workplace strategist while working at Credit Suisse for many years. Was part of a program there to develop a full mobility workplace environment that came with a lot of explorations around how to incorporate technology to enable that kind of thing. My background's actually in technology, so I've become fast friends with people like my panelists here and the whole sort of prop tech and workplace tech industry. Then was a consultant at JLL in the workplace consulting team and founded the workplace strategy practice at WeWork, which was a wild ride to say nonetheless. So here to bring the occupier perspective, I think, to the conversation.
Great, thanks, Phil. And Ben.
Thanks, Darlene. Deng Grippi with Metlife Investment Management. I lead innovation for the Metlife real estate team. We have a pretty wide platform, nearly 100 billion in AUM. Our focus primarily is on the equity side of the house, where there's a lot more ability to make decisions around innovation and technology. That platform is about 30 billion. Every asset sector, all large ones, including hospitality, are included. I've been with real estate about 4 years. I've been with MetLife for 14. The prior 10 years of my career, I spent leading the quantitative risk program for MetLife Investments.
Great. And one of the things I always like to do when we kick off a conversation is define your terms. So with that, we're going to define what is a digital workplace. And Ben, I'm going to start with you. From your perspective, what is a digital workplace?
Oh, so for me, digital workplace really revolves around occupant experience. To me, having a seamless, connected feeling with your built world as an occupant of any space, whether it's multifamily, office, or otherwise, defines digital for me. Now, obviously, there are elements of that have to do specifically with mobile. Having connectivity between your mobile platforms and whatever's happening in your built world, I think is really important. But I think more broadly than that, there are systems and connectivity in whatever space you're in that should be seamless to you that define digital.
Great. So Erica, from your perspective, tell us a little bit about what you consider a digital workplace. I know you kind of got the roots with Comfy and temperature control, but expanded way beyond that now. So tell us about what you're doing in digital workplace.
Yeah, no, it certainly has expanded since our origins. And so, I think one of the words that Ben just mentioned, connected, right? So I think looking to connect across a lot of different, again, systems, whether those be more IT based or more actual physical technology. And I think, I think a lot about how we can use that connectedness to support short-term and long-term goals and multiple stakeholders. Ben was just talking about occupant experience, or again, for Comfy's consideration is usually employee experience, but we're also thinking about stakeholders like HR managers, real estate managers, and how all of that integrated technology can support multiple use cases in the short term and the long term.
So Sagar, I mean, Yardi kind of traditionally financial real estate software. So tell us about your expansion into digital workplace and what digital workplace means to you.
Absolutely, and I think Ben and Erica both hit the right points. But I've also seen like an experience with speaking to our customers and our experience with implementing these solutions. As soon as we hear that term, our thoughts go towards these futuristic workplaces with AI and bots and people roaming around with VR headsets, right? The truth is that digital is already here and it's been here for a while, right? It's just that the landscape is very different across these organizations. So, it means different thing for different organizations. So in my opinion, if I had to summarize in one statement, I would say it's about striking the right balance between people experience and technology.
Mm-hmm. So Phil, kind of walk us through the evolution then. I know you've been in workplace strategy for a very long time and over the last 10 to 15 years, it's transformed tremendously from kind of the old manual processes to a very data-driven type of approach. So tell us a little bit about that evolution and where you see digital workplace today. Keep mics on, mics off.
There you go.
There you go.
That problem number one with digital workplace, mute button. I think my definition of digital workplace generally is very consistent with what everyone has said. I think to Sagar's last point, it's about kind of parity in the experience between physical and digital, especially as companies are leaning more into an activated workplace to be more magnetic for staff, like coming back in, seamlessly supporting their individual and team productivity with technology as much as possible. And then Ben, I think you hinted at this concept of like pervasive awareness of what's around you. And that could be available resources, it could be what other people are working on or opportunities to help or how to control the temperature. But we all want this sort of sixth sense of how to engage with the workplace, and technology is certainly going to enable that. So to the question of like how workplace strategy has evolved, really it's that not that many years ago, and for many companies now, the concept of having a strategy about the role that the physical environment plays for your employees is still new. Like most companies, if you ask, like, why do you have an office in Chicago? The answer might be because I have people in Chicago, which is not really that great an answer. It's not that intentional about the purpose of the place. So companies that have explored new ways of working over the last, say, 10, 15 years have been forced down a path of learning by data. And Darlene, to your point, it has been mostly manual, but that's been mostly fine. Starting with like traditional surveys or physical observation studies. And I think we have a long way to go to offering more real-time, like pulse-oriented information about the comings and goings of staff, what they feel like, the choices that they're making, the depth of their engagement with individual tools, and bringing techniques that, frankly, a lot of companies do for their customer experience to their employee experience and the role that the place has and how they feel about working for that company.
Mm-hmm. So Erica, let's talk about some of the applications of a digital workplace, because we've gone from very old school bricks and mortar, light switches and everything's manual to, everything controlled by mobile apps. And we're in a workplace environment now where you can literally book a room by walking into it. Right. So, I mean, some mind-blowing experiences. So talk to us a little bit about what you see are the next big things, or the not even the next big things, but what are the current things and the applications that you're seeing in digital workplace that you would consider kind of that mind-blowing experience?
Yeah, well, I think, as Phil was just talking about, we've seen a lot of trends that were already happening within the industry accelerated due to just what's been going on in the world in the last, 6 to 8 months. So I know we don't want to center a lot of this conversation around COVID, and we shouldn't, because I think it's really just an accelerant to, again, trends that we were seeing. But some of the key use cases that we're supporting our enterprise clients with are, first and foremost, right, how do you safely bring employees back to the office space, but really support what will be the new model of working. So right now, I think, the must-have use cases are around compliance management and capacity management. So how are we enabling really, sites all across the world who have wildly different regulatory, compliance models that need to be followed? How are we sort of creating global platforms that can support hyper-local instances. And so I think that's one where, again, sort of this right sizing of giving employees the trust and the confidence that it is safe to return. There's a lot of use cases around that, from, again, capacity management to mobile boarding passes to seamless entry that's triggered actually by those mobile boarding passes to affirm that I have a reserved space for today. And then I think that leads into the more engagement within the physical workspace. So like you said, designated space specifically for me, and understanding in a much more hybrid working model. Are the people I need to collaborate with today? Are they in the office? Are they working from a more site or satellite office today? And how do we begin to drive more collaboration and culture, which so many organizations, while we've maintained productivity in a predominantly work from home environment, we've seen, negative sides around culture, around collaboration. How can we use digital technologies to really, create more of that? And so we're seeing use cases around, again, physically booking space, collaborating and aligning employees around that being top of mind for our enterprise clients.
So Ben, I automatically associate digital workplace with data, right? So there's a tremendous amount of data that's coming out of our buildings from, anything from operations data to space management, occupancy data to employee experience and productivity type of data. So from your perspective, what are the top data sets that you think are critical to having a digital workplace?
Yeah, I think Erica really hit the nail on the head. For me, it's occupancy. I mean, from the landlord perspective, the verticals that we've been most, in tune with, really post-COVID. But to Erica, to your point, it's really an accelerant of things we were doing prior to COVID. It was around tenant engagement, right? Tenant engagement applications, the HVAC side of the house, which could have everything to do with how you optimize systems, but also how you measure occupancy as the other side of that equation, and then and access management. And if you talk about data, each of those verticals has wildly different data models that you need to incorporate and then consolidate. And maybe that's in a database, maybe that's in the cloud. It's a really challenging landscape for an owner because 5 years ago, our data model was financials and rent rolls and building information, and that's in the wheelhouse of a Yardi, right? Things that they're quite good at. But now you're trying to consolidate operational data, OT stuff, right? And really maximize that across a portfolio. It's a difficult proposition, and I would say that it's also it lends itself also to risk, because there's quite a bit of data that you would consider consuming that is of a higher order of magnitude of impact to the person you're consuming it from. Right. So, where someone is in the building, their mobile beacon, maybe information from their mobile phone, for instance. If you think about how COVID has impacted the way we utilize access management controls, there are, a number of tools that you could use to check people's temperatures, and other sort of health related metrics that an owner would never have had even considered consuming or otherwise having in their building. And so it becomes a really complicated landscape to navigate.
Mm-hmm. So Sagar, let's talk a little bit more about the data, because it's one thing to collect data. It's another thing to aggregate it and try to correlate multiple data streams. So from a Yardi perspective, you guys are collecting a lot of data from a lot of different places. So how do we start to pull that together and look at the correlation of things like, occupancy and CO2 levels, or occupancy and energy consumption, or occupancy and BMS operations? So let's talk a little bit about not just bringing that data in, but correlating it and integrating it, and some of the value behind that level of integration.
That's a great question, Darlene, and I'm glad you asked it. The typical perception is that Yardi is a property management platform, and we have the data around the financials and the rent rolls. But then we have a suite of products which we implement for our clients that addresses all these questions across a spectrum, right? So from a data standpoint, what's clear to me is that the concept of digital workplace evolves over time, right? And we should be very deliberate and conscious about it. So when I think about the top data sets, it's all about how do we deliver measurable returns, is the key. Whether it's increased efficiency and productivity, reducing security and health risks, right? Because of COVID, now all of that is, right in front of us. Enhanced level of employee engagement and satisfaction, and then cost, resource, and time savings. So, Darlene, when you said like bringing all of this together, like with Yardi Quorum, our suite for corporate occupiers, we are addressing the space management, the occupancy, the cost, aspect of the problem here. And then with our Pulse Energy solution, we are, addressing the HVAC automating, the AI-enabled, optimization workflows, and understanding your, energy spend, understanding your real estate expenses, understanding your occupancy, and bringing it all together with your financials is the power that Yardi platform can deliver because of that single stack, end-to-end solution for corporate occupiers.
So that's really looking at digital workplace from kind of a unified data collection and reporting platform, right? So Phil, for you then, let's talk a little bit about the human element, because there's one thing to talk about the technology and the capabilities of the technology, but what impact does that technology have on the people? And I'll specifically kick off with something like occupancy detection and tracking, and nobody likes to be tracked kind of thing. So talk a little bit about some of the technologies that you're seeing in the workplace and how they impact the occupant experience.
Sure. So, just to tie it back to the data question, everybody wants to talk about occupancy. The thing I'm the most interested in is voluntary occupancy. That's like the holy grail right now. When did I come in, even though I didn't have to? Especially as you get into things, again, I mentioned like activated workplaces, like having events or other things that are deliberately designed to bring people in. The thing everybody's going to want to know is, did you go to that thing even when you didn't have to? So that goes to your point, Darlene, that like occupancy is the holy grail, utilization is the holy grail. Did somebody walk in? How many people were there? Where were they? How are they moving about? And we're perfectly comfortable sort of disclosing that information in our normal lives. Like, as you said, bring up the phone. Like, my house is 10 times smarter than any office I've ever worked in. And we routinely trade our privacy for experience in the real world. But our office almost never has any case to make to allow us to make that trade. And most companies start down the path of like looking at badge data, or maybe we'll bring in some kind of occupancy sensor under the desk. And there are now countless famous examples of companies who have thought that they could do that without engaging the employee into the problem. And then surprise, surprise, they don't like that. We don't like being tracked. And any employee who's ever heard, like, I'm putting in sensors to help your experience in an existing workplace, calls bull immediately. And it's like, no, you want to know how many of us are here. And even though the sensor's not, doesn't know who I am, the sensor's on the desk that has my name on it, so you know who I am. But on the flip side, like when I was at Credit Suisse, there was a period of time we were doing kind of switch-based and login-driven tracking based on virtual desktop terminals in a shared environment. So you had to sit down at a computer, and we were capturing where were you logging in. And the users on those floors, even though we weren't publishing the information that way, they knew full well that people like myself on the team could go back and find a name. And this was before GDPR, and obviously it's had to evolve now since I've left. But they were totally okay with it, actually, over time, on the basis that it was well understood that if someone was experiencing, especially like a crowding on a floor, a huge floor, or a building that's totally shared where people can move around at their own volition, if they came in one day and said, why is this part of the building twice as crowded as it's been in the last 3 months, that they could approach someone on the real estate team and be like, help me like review the tape. What happened? Did someone new move to the building? Did someone just decide to change neighborhoods? Like, what was it? So because we could do that, and they knew that it was like, we're here to not make you miserable, they're okay knowing that we were tracking, because under normal circumstances, I had no reason to be looking
Right. Well, even now it's kind of a catch-22 because on the one hand, people want de-densification and they want to be able to have contact tracing if someone came into contact with them that had COVID, but yet they don't want to give up the data on where I am and if I have COVID. So you got to try to balance the two. So Erica, what are you seeing in the market in terms of the adoption of a lot of digital workplace technologies versus the human element of do we like this, do we not?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question. And I think Phil framed it exactly right. Like in all of our consumer lives, we give up data because we have perceived benefit from it, right? I'm able to more seamlessly pay for things. I'm able to get exactly what I want delivered to my doorstep, whatever it might be. And I think we as vendors within this marketplace and as enterprise corporations look to provide value and experience to their employees, they need to be constantly sort of keeping that consumer bar in mind. And so, when we think about using occupancy information, I think there's a couple really important things. One, you have to be really clear about what data you are collecting and how it's being put to use. And so, that's really important, data privacy and making sure that that's really clear to your end users. But I think, come the end users begin to understand the value that it can create, right? Where again, they can understand what spaces are available to them to make sure that impromptu meetings, again, finding coworkers, knowing, am I going to have to wait 15 minutes in the cafeteria? Maybe I don't want to go right now. These are all real live use cases that can be implemented using data. But I think, again, making that one thing that we just probably as an industry haven't done great enough is just explaining that very, in basic terms to our employees about why this data is valuable to them and how we're being really transparent and safe in how we're using data. And so I think that's one thing. And I think using opt-in models, which company does, right? So I think we might have mentioned earlier around beacons, there's all these technologies require extra layers of opt-in for end users to use. And those are really important. And if I can make one more comment before we transition just on the data, because I think it's really important, is, I think, Phil, you were talking about voluntary occupancy. I think another thing that's absolutely critical that digital tools can be and should be using right now is sentiment data. How can we be getting more information about how employees are actually experiencing the space and why? So it's not just enough to know that I showed up and I didn't have to, but why did I do that? What was I seeking? And then how do we as providers start to create more real-time feedback and implement that into how we're designing space and how we're operating space or programming?
Hey, Darlene, really quickly, I want to address that point because I think there's the other lens to look at that through is appropriate allocation of capital, right? So what you just described is the human experience and how well that person in that space is connected and feels comfortable and safe, and et cetera. The other thing that you can draw back from all those analytics is how well have you deployed the capital to your space, right? Especially in the future, I think where Erica was going is in the future when you want to know where people are going to be, whether it be hub and spoke or work from home mix, all this stuff, you're going to have to deploy capital to make that happen. And the analytics behind that capital will make it easy for you to make good bets in your buildings rather than deploy capital that is, unutilized.
Well,
just
Phil,
comment super fast on that. Like, just there is. I find myself saying to a lot of clients, like, there's a danger in overuse of the word capital, which is very common in real estate because experience is a labor of OpEx and not CapEx. Obviously, like, you have to spend the CapEx on the building and the tech, but the thing that draws people in and keeps them there very often isn't the stuff you spent your CapEx on. It's your continued, voluntary and discretionary spend on making it not suck to be at work.
Right. Yeah, can we quote you on that?
Yes,
one of the things
please.
that I do want to talk about, and Phil, you mentioned, your house is 10 times more smarter than your office, and I'm, my house is the same way, fully automated, voice activation. You tell Alexa turn on lights and lock doors, and feed my dog, and things just happen around you, and you're used to that. But then we go to the office, and we have none of that. It all kind of goes away as soon as you step over the threshold into the office. So, Ben, one of the things I want to ask you, about creating this seamless experience from home to office, right? And especially now when so many more people are working from home, how do we create that better transition to get them back to the office and really give them more of the amenities in the building that they have, that they're used to in their home?
I think what underpins that is the right tenant engagement application, the right tenant engagement experience. And there are a handful of them out there. There's Lane, there's HQO, there's a whole bunch of them that you can deploy to your building. And they span different occupants, obviously, for the whole building stack. I think the reason that those apps are going to become really important is there's going to be some amount of connectivity and integration between those apps and the occupant apps, which are being rolled out as we speak, right, to bring people back to work. And the core of those apps, to be totally frank about, data privacy and people giving away their data, the core of that app is so that the employer can know how healthy you are, right? That's the bottom line. You're going to say, today I feel really good. I didn't travel in the last 2 weeks and I'm on my way to work. And they're going to utilize that information to make sure that the workplace is safe, that you're not sick in any way. And they're going to utilize that information to figure out where you would like to be and where you're going to be most productive. But I think there's an element of integration that's going to have to happen between those applications, which are disparate, right? That you could have a office stack with 30 different occupants, all with different, health applications, which, to your point, Darlene, might have contact tracing elements as well. And you're going to have the wrapper of that building, which is the owner's problem, so that everybody who goes there on a given day can use amenities and services and can be communicated to about things like how congested are the elevators, for instance. And I think that in the future state is the home run. Like, that's the holy grail from a landlord's perspective, is integrating the occupant experience between their employer and the building itself, the built world, so that they feel a seamless transition from their home into the workplace.
Well, I recall, when I was at JLL District Center, MetLife's District Center in DC was one of our biggest projects. And even back then, that was probably 3-4 years ago, one of the first technologies we deployed there was a mobile app that would open the door, right? So now you're looking at touchless technologies. Nobody wants to touch a door handle. Nobody wants to push a button in an elevator because that's just gross. And even if we have a vaccine, people aren't going to want to touch the same thing that other people have been touching. So, Erica, from that standpoint, what is Comfy thinking about? Because I know that you've got, an app for this, an app for that kind of thing. What's on your roadmap in terms of supporting more touchless technologies or more digital workplace apps?
Yeah, Darlene, you're absolutely right. And we're seeing all of the same trends kind of within across our customer base, I should say. And so, the way that we think about it at Comfy is thinking about kind of key workflows that tenants, and employees have throughout their day. So, like we said, even leaving their home in the morning, right? How are they looking to see who's working in the office today versus working from home? How do they ensure that they have a physical space? So getting that mobile boarding pass. Then again, what's a workflow once they're actually entering? So we're seeing a lot of demand for touchless experience, like you meant. So elevator lobbies, access control, temperature and lighting control, deploying things like kiosks. So once I'm physically there, without having to touch anything, I can get a very quick kind of purview into where are people, what spaces are available, and where might it be best for me to book my space for the day. So we really think about those workflows from safe entering the building, finding the right space for them, and engaging with the physical environment through touchless experience, and are delivering actually a lot of that value to customers already today.
So, Sagar, we've talked a lot about data and data privacy, and I think this is probably a good time to bring in IoT, because we talked a little bit about sensors, but there's so many different things that are being connected in the buildings that are collecting data and sending data. So talk to us a little bit about kind of balancing technology, people, and privacy, and how do you do that effectively?
Absolutely. And so, I totally agree with Erica and Ben. And, I think it's a continuation of the seamless experience that Ben just mentioned. So when I think about what we have done for our clients, it broadly falls into two buckets, and it's employee experience and then space management, real estate management, building management, portfolio management, whatever you want to call it. Employee experience is everything that Erica just mentioned, including this new flavor that has been added since March because of COVID, where the focus on health and COVID surveys and being able to check in is important. But I think what we are also focusing on is once we are all back to work and COVID is in the past, what are the technologies that are going to stick, that are going to stay with us, and how it's becoming a permanent thing for all the employees going forward. So, reserving the desk and having that flexibility is the key word here, where I think there was a recent survey where, a lot of these office employees were surveyed, and it seems like over 60% of the employees expect to have the flexibility to be able to work from home for some portion of the week, right? And then very few said we want to go back to office full time, and then very few said we want to be fully remote full time. So there is that balance, and so when you think about changing occupancy levels more dynamically than it was before, the tech when it comes to your HVAC systems and how it's intelligently understanding your occupancy and reducing the levels of energy that is being spent is like one important factor, right? Because that's one of the single largest expense for any occupant or any building owner at any given point in time. There are all these IoT related solutions that have come up due to COVID, where when you are entering a building, it automatically does a temperature check for you and make sure that you are healthy, right? So I don't know if that's going to be something that's going to be long term, short term. It all depends. But at Yardi, we are in that privileged position where, because of our history with all these building owners and landlords and providing software to them for last 4 decades, we can create that seamless experience from the landlord tech to the occupier tech, and give them this experience across their IoT usage, their occupancy usage, their employee experience.
Well, I think that's a good segue also, because there's a lot of different types of real estate verticals, right? You've got your corporate owner occupiers, you've got your investment owners who are dealing with 20, 30, 40 tenants in a building, and they've all got different priorities and things like that. So Ben, from a Metlife standpoint, I mean, you've got to balance digital workplace solutions for many, many different tenants. So what are you seeing are kind of the primary applications that you can deploy as the building owner, the asset management company, versus the technologies that are really more the workplace and the tenant technologies?
Oh yeah, I mean that's good. It's a good segue. I would say we certainly we try to maintain the occupant experience up until like the elevator banks, right? So they go to their suite, and then from then on, it's sort of your employer maintains your experience within your suite, within your space. But there's a lot to that, right? So I kind of touched on this, but with what's happened with COVID, a great example of occupant experience change is around high-rise office, right? CBD high-rise office, where the return to work story is difficult in markets where you have a lot of high-rise office because you can't put enough people in the elevators anymore to get them efficiently up into their floors. So what you find is you put 4 people in an elevator bank maybe, and it takes 4 hours to get your workforce all the way up to the upper floors of the building, which basically means there's no point in putting everybody back in the building. You're wasting too much time. So if you're the owner and you can create a value prop for all those tenants to say, okay, your office team is going to show up at the building. You're going to have a highly connected experience in my lobby, in my common areas before you go up to your suite. You're also going to have an application that's going to tell you in advance, what does the volume on the elevators look like? Is it really busy? Is it not busy? Is it an hour wait? And you'll have the potential to book a space on an elevator before you get there so that you can efficiently manage your time before you go to your office. Now, all of that requires the underpinning of a real technology architecture that does not exist for most buildings. The majority of buildings do not have that technology architecture to do that. But that's, to me, the future of the office worker needs to be that. And I think, Erica, you touched on this too. It's not just, riding an elevator. It's going to the right space, right? Who's there, when? Because it's all going to be collaboration and culture from now on. It's not going to be desk work. Desk work you're going to do at home. And that piece of it, if you can enable that with technology, is going to make the workforce so much more efficient and productive.
Mm-hmm. So Phil, talk a little bit about how you see technology transforming workplace strategy. And by that, I mean, I know we kind of use traditional methods to do occupancy planning, to do workplace strategy, but if we've got real-time data, we get to a point where we can start to predict what's going to happen tomorrow. where do you see technology being able to literally do things like dynamically do restacking plans, or only open half of a building because we know that on Fridays we're at 40% occupancy? So how does this digital workplace and all of this data and this technology completely transform the way that we're going to do occupancy planning and workplace strategy in the future?
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it. I actually said a few times last week to a few different people the same version, or different versions of the same thing, which was just like, yeah, that's great, but imagine how you would do it if you didn't have an actual like space planner. Like, imagine that the space planner isn't there. How would you do it? What are the sort of advanced analytics and machine learning and AI that you would bring to the equation? And frankly, like, the technology is there now. There are applications on the market that could do, in theory, daily hypothetical scenario planning and restacks for you. Like, that's commercially available. But we don't like that. Like, all of them are operating under the basis that like humans are totally okay showing up to an office and being nudged to go somewhere. And again, like, we do this in other elements of our life. We show up for a rental car and someone's like, your car is number 5, where you had no idea what you were going to get into. We show up to conference centers and say, hey, I'm here for like the marketing meeting. And they're like, great, you're in the whatever room. We don't need a complete predictability as long as we know on the other end of that the service is going to be what we expect. So the only thing holding us back has been like paper and managers. And the manager problem hopefully is being solved a little bit by COVID, and that at least we're all having the same uniform experience of, shockingly, the company has not burst into flames just because we're all working at home. But like, stuff is still real. People are still creatures of habit. We're not accustomed to showing up in the office as like a temporal experience. And then that says nothing of the fact that the facility is not necessarily smart enough to handle the most extreme version of that, of like, the building, am telling you, the marketing team, go to the 3rd floor today, and I'm shut down the 4th floor. I've rebooked all your meetings. I've told all your people where to go. And the answer there is going to lie in what everyone has sort of hinted at, that like, today there's the tenant experience business and the employee experience business. And for all that to happen, it's got to be the same thing.
Right. No, great point.
Just like we're trying to convince employees of our companies, like, give me your data, trust me so that I can deliver an experience to you. The same equation exists for the landlord to the tenant. Like, tenants don't like giving up their stuff or allowing the landlord to pierce into their demised suite or floor, because they're like, there isn't enough value for me to let you do that. To overcome the potential risks. But in like co-working and service office environments, we effectively do that today, right? So the case exists, but it's change management across the board to like knock down all those lines and let people allow the space to move as fluidly as we know the technology can.
Right. That's a great point. So Erica, we're talking, future digital twins where we've got a digital representation of a building. So I think we can't have a conversation about digital workplace without talking about digital twins. And even when you're looking at this purple platform that we're using for this conference, creating an avatar and walking through a digital conference in a digital world and running into people digitally as if it's the same experience. Let's talk a little bit about, what are your plans? What's on the roadmap for Compy, or even what are you doing now that's creating kind of that digital twin, that digital workplace, that kind of AI type of environment?
Well, I think and just to even piggyback, I think a little bit on what Phil was talking about, I think we're at a very interesting time. I think not just for all the technology that you were just mentioning that's already readily available, that we're seeing new use cases, but some of these incentive alignments, right? Because I think what Phil was just talking about is super interesting, where I think, we talked earlier about the trade-offs of privacy, but I think to the human behavior side of it, we now have incentives and trade-offs that employees are willing to make to break the norm, right? Where the fact that I get to work from home 2 or 3 days a week means I'm probably going to be more comfortable with a more flexible work environment. And a manager who's now proven that, my team can work productively, but I can maybe have a more distributed team to get better talent acquisition, I'm going to be more comfortable breaking a lot of these norms. And so I think we're starting to see a lot of these trade-offs start to align, that now the underlying technology that we are seeing, whether it be digital twins, whether it be sort of all of the integrations that we talked about at the outside of this call, starts to create really interesting use cases where technology applications can start to really, take off. And so I think, Phil, what you brought up around behavior nudges is actually very interesting. And that's where Comfy is actually uniquely kind of talking with customers, because as we see the business case for space optimization, right? Where we're seeing time and again, over 60%, I think on our last survey that we did internally at Comfy, we saw over 75% of our customers and prospects interested in moving to a much more distributed workplace where they're reducing space between 30 to 40% across their portfolio. But for them to be able to achieve that, we still need peak occupancy management, right? So I can't just say everybody's going to work from home 2 to 3 days a week if everybody still comes in on Wednesday, right? I can't realize those space reductions. And so I think the notion of behavior nudges and engaging the employee in this process is absolutely key. And so having physical representations that can rapidly iterate on what future space models will be enabled through digital twin is going to be pivotal to that, but so is engaging the employee.
Mm-hmm.
Can I say, sorry, I had companies are terrified of peak occupancy, and I think they have to not be. All the fun happens with peak occupancy.
But even now, peak occupancy is 50% of what it used to be, right? So now people are terrified of peak occupancy, unfortunately. And I think people are craving that human experience, even that we get over Zoom or that we get out of virtual interactive avatar conferences, So I think you have to kind of balance what are the primary drivers. And it used to be human interaction, and now it's people are afraid of that, quite frankly. But so Sagar, let's go back. Let's talk a little bit more about the digital twin model, because obviously to have a digital twin, a representation of the building or the space, you've got to have a tremendous amount of data. So is Yardi doing anything in that area with digital twin or AI, or really taking all of this data and turning it into machine learning?
Yeah, absolutely. So just so that from a market penetration standpoint, 45 to 50% of the commercial buildings in North America are managed on Yardi platform. So natively, we have data that we can anonymize and aggregate at a level that a lot of other companies cannot. So what we have done is with our commercial edge offering, we have aggregated some of this data to present a view to not just the landlords but also the occupiers of where their standing is in the market, and various other attributes that you would as it is important for your overall real estate strategy. Mm-hmm. And then from a employee experience standpoint, I think we have done, we've talked a lot about it, right? And I'm not going to rehash all these points because, all this, booking a space and, the temperature aspect of it, or, everything else is super important here. But we also have to understand and realize that this social distancing aspect of our, future workplace is not a few months thing, right? It's a multi-year thing. And so when we say that employees are going remote and companies are thinking about reducing the footprint, that's probably true for some organizations. But for some other organizations, it's like, they are increasing the footprint. And the reason is because they have to comply with the social distancing norms, and they'll have to, be at 10% benchmark, and then 20% threshold and 30% threshold, right? And so over the next 2 or 3 years, they'll need more space to accommodate significantly reduced, but still the amount of employees that are going to go back to work. So so providing technology which helps you understand from a landlord perspective what your tenants requirements are going to be, and then from a tenant perspective about what your future real estate footprint is going to look like, and based on the occupancy and based on this booking your space, and all of that is going to be super important. That's where we have invested a lot in the last few months, and this Yardi Quorum suite of solutions helps our clients with that.
That's great. So I know we're running out of time here. I just want to go around the circle and ask in 20 seconds or less, what is the next big thing for you in digital workplace? And we're going to start with Ben. What's the next big thing?
Cybersecurity. So we talked very briefly about IoT, but to me, we're going to have double, triple, quadruple the amount of connected devices in the next 5 years. All that introduces vulnerability to the buildings that we operate, multifamily office or otherwise, and we need a concerted cybersecurity strategy to keep people safe.
Perfect. Phil, what's the next big thing?
Yeah, Ben told my first one. I started my career in cybersecurity, and that's the one that kind of keeps me up at night in the back of my head. But I think I said connecting everything that we're doing to sentiment and that tracking of like voluntary actions and where we choose to go relative to where we had to go. It's most interesting to me.
Sagar?
I would say it's a sweet balance between, and it's always tricky to have that balance, but balance between automation and self-service, employee experience and space management, bringing all of that together in a meaningful way, where we are not just focusing on one end of the spectrum and then leaving the other end of the spectrum to be, not addressed. So I think that's what is important to me, and that's what we are going to be focused on the next few months.
Great. And Erica, I'll give you the final word. What's the next big thing for Comfy and digital workplace?
Yeah, thanks, Darlene. I think, as Sagar was speaking to, what we're really focused on is near-term use cases centered around compliance and safe entry, but using those as the entry point into much longer-term platform extension. So really, initial investment now that serves much longer-term horizon investment for clients.
Great. Thank you so much. This is a great panel. I appreciate all of you giving your time today and sharing your thoughts with us. I do want to encourage you all to jump into the Purple platform if you're not already in there, and join us after Mark's keynote this afternoon. We'll have a networking event at 4:45, I believe, up on the rooftop. So I hope to see you guys there. Thanks again. Have a great afternoon.